In the warm embrace of June 2009, a time when the deserts of Afghanistan were already scorching, the US and NATO forces executed a strategic surge. The number of troops swelled like the unforgiving sun, all in a concentrated effort to challenge the Taliban stronghold. Amongst these were a small, tight-knit team of 8 Marines, an elite unit I was a part of. We were assigned a daunting mission: to man an observation post in the rugged terrains of Helmand Province, where a contingent of British soldiers had been holding the fort. In military parlance, an observation post, or OP, is exactly what it sounds like: a vantage point for vigilant eyes. These posts, almost invariably perched on high ground, serve as crucial strategic assets. Their elevation grants a commanding view of the surroundings, turning these spots into coveted targets for enemy forces. Our destination, OP Rock, had a peculiar character. It wasn't perched atop the highest ground, which made it uniquely vulnerable. Instead of looking down upon the landscape, we were surrounded by towering terrain, a sniper's paradise. OP Rock was a precarious and isolated outpost, almost laughably small and devoid of basic comforts. We were to expect nothing more than rudimentary HESCO barriers for protection, those large brown containers filled with sand and earth, barely enough to halt a bullet. Forget about cots. Our beds were the hard, unforgiving ground, with only meager ghillie tents for cover. It was a bleak setup for what was to be a grueling 60-day deployment. Leading our pack was Sergeant Green, a man as tough as the terrain we were about to embrace, with Corporal Lena as his right hand. The rest of us, Marines Hoyt, Wilson, Parker, Smith, Gibbs, and I, formed the backbone of this small unit. We navigated our up-armored vehicles through treacherous passes to reach OP Rock, where the British soldiers awaited us, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion. Turnover operations are standard protocol in such scenarios. They're vital for understanding the lay of the land, for identifying enemy strongholds and potential threats like IEDs. But here, the British troops were so eager to depart that they skipped this crucial step. They looked like they had weathered a century's worth of battles, though it had only been 60 days. Their haggard appearance was a silent warning of what lay ahead for us. One of the departing British soldiers, with a sense of urgency in his eyes, left us with a cryptic piece of advice: "If you dig anything up here, just put it back." We exchanged puzzled glances, but before we could probe further, he repeated his warning and left. That first night at OP Rock was eerie. The responsibility of the first watch fell to Corporal Lena. From his position in the guard tower, he peered into the darkness, the weight of his role as second-in-command heavy on his shoulders. In that vast, silent expanse, every shadow and every whisper of the wind felt like a harbinger of unseen horrors lurking just beyond our view. Imagine the stark contrast of that barren landscape, a mountainous desert where the only sign of civilization is the remote outpost you're guarding. There's nothing but the rugged terrain and the ominous presence of mountains, hiding those who wish you harm. It's just you and your 7 brothers in arms, all vulnerable in slumber within this tiny OP. Your lifeline, a radio that connects you to a main base, a distant haven that might as well be a world away. The fear that gnaws at you isn't just the isolation, it's the knowledge that at any moment an ambush could erupt. The Taliban are notorious for launching brutal attacks on outposts like ours, overpowering small units in a matter of moments. During my time in Afghanistan, guard duty was a surreal experience. Perched in that lookout shack, surrounded by an expanse of nothingness, the paranoia was palpable. Every shadow could conceal a threat. Every silence could be the precursor to chaos. The night was an eerie blanket, and under its cover, you couldn't help but wonder if somewhere in the darkness, someone was taking aim at you. Despite all the precautions and defenses, you're starkly aware of your vulnerability. Corporal Lena, standing his watch that first night, felt this all too keenly. The stillness was punctuated by the crackling of the radio, a sound that should have been routine but wasn't. Military radios, relics from a bygone era, were prone to quirks. But this was different. Initially, Lena dismissed the static as a minor glitch, but when it persisted, he grew concerned. A malfunctioning radio in a place like this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a lifeline severed. The static evolved into something more unsettling. Faint whispers, not in English or any recognizable language, crept through the radio. Lena, trained to handle such equipment, quickly checked the battery, hoping it was a simple issue. But the mystery deepened when he heard a voice, distinctly speaking in what sounded like Russian. Our radios were encrypted, secured against eavesdropping. This shouldn't have been possible. With a growing sense of unease, Lena reached out to our main base, inquiring if they were transmitting to us. The immediate response was negative. No one was sending communications to OP Rock. This deepened the mystery. All my fellow Marines were accounted for, sleeping soundly on the hard ground. None of them were on the radio. Throughout the night, the radio continued its bizarre symphony of crackles and distorted voices. By morning, when the next guard took over, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He warned his relief about the radio's strange behavior, leaving him to ponder the unexplained occurrences that had pierced the silence of that Afghan night. After his unsettling night on guard duty, Corporal Lena suggested swapping the malfunctioning radio for a working one. Relieved from his post, he descended to check on the rest of us. By then, we were all up, bracing for our first full day at OP Rock. Our primary task was clear: fortify this desolate outpost. We scrutinized our surroundings, noting the shallow trench hugging the inner perimeter of the Heskos. It was meant for cover, but it was woefully inadequate, barely a couple of feet deep. Anyone standing in it would be an easy target for enemy snipers. We couldn't fathom why the British soldiers, who had occupied this post before us, hadn't deepened it during their 60-day stint. Resolved to rectify this oversight, we decided to spend the day digging the trench deeper and wider. While excavating, Lena struck something metallic. He unearthed a metal stake, encrusted with dirt. Wiping it clean, he found inscriptions in what appeared to be Russian. "Makes sense," he mused, recalling the Russian occupation in the 80s. It was plausible they had left some equipment behind. Not far from Lena, one of our younger Marines, Wilson, was also digging when his shovel hit something hard. He uncovered a cavity in the soil, revealing fragments of pottery and ceramics. But what he found next sent chills down our spines. A human femur, unmistakably a leg bone. Recalling the British soldiers' cryptic advice, we reburied the bone and redirected our digging efforts. However, it wasn't long before we encountered more skeletal remains. By the end of the day, we had stumbled upon dozens of skeletons within the trench. It was a macabre discovery that lent a sinister air to our already eerie surroundings. A couple of weeks passed, and we had somewhat acclimatized to the grim reality of our abode. But on the 13th day, an incident shook us to our core. Hoyt, who had just celebrated his 20th birthday, was on guard duty that night. He was suddenly gripped by an unnerving sensation, feeling as though someone was right behind him. Spinning around to confront this unseen presence, he found nothing but the empty camp. Then, from the darkness outside the perimeter, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. Hoyt, with his night vision goggles, scanned the area and spotted a figure darting between bushes a couple of 100 meters away. We were all on high alert, expecting a Taliban attack at any moment. The other Marines and I roused from our positions, focusing on Hoyt for direction. He reported a lone figure moving swiftly in the distance. Lena rushed to the edge of the Hesko barriers, his rifle equipped with a thermal imager aimed into the night. But the imager showed nothing, no heat signatures, no trace of animals or humans. The night was eerily still, devoid of any life. Confused and tense, Lena shouted to Hoyt, demanding to know the location of the mysterious figure. But the darkness outside OP Rock held no answers, only deepening the mystery and fear that had begun to envelop us. Hoyt insisted, his voice tinged with urgency, that the figure had ducked behind a bush. Yet Lena, scanning the area with his thermal imager, found nothing. It was as if the night had swallowed the mysterious figure whole. Amongst us was a dog, Ugly Betty, a scrappy survivor we had inherited from the British. She had become more than just a pet. She was our alarm system, with an uncanny knack for sensing approaching threats. That night, her behavior was unnerving. She barked incessantly, fixated on the very spot where Hoyt had seen the figure, her instincts on high alert despite our technology showing nothing. The tension didn't ease as the hours crawled by. Every one of us was on edge, expecting an imminent attack, a gunshot, a grenade, anything. The phantom figure Hoyt had seen was now a ghost in our minds, a threat that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The next day passed without incident, but the unease lingered, an unsettling reminder of our vulnerability. Weeks rolled on, and on the 26th day, Zolek was on guard duty in the sweltering heat. He recalled the temperature inside the shack dropping inexplicably, a sudden chill that seemed out of place in the Afghan desert. The air was still, no breeze to justify the sudden cold. Zolek, feeling a presence behind him, kept glancing over his shoulder, but there was never anyone there. The sensation of being watched was oppressive, and then the whispers started. Not through the radio this time, but right there in the shack with him. He could even hear footsteps overhead. Convinced that Smith, our unit's prankster, was messing with him, Zolek burst out of the shack, expecting to catch him in the act. But the shack's roof was empty. A quick search around the shack revealed nothing. Smith and the others were all sound asleep. Zolek's nerves were frayed. He returned to the shack, rifle in hand, scanning the surroundings with his thermal scope. Any human presence would be unmistakable through the scope, but there was nothing. No sign of the whispers, the footsteps, or the eerie chill. Then, through the scope, Zolek spotted a man standing a few hundred meters away, fists raised in an odd, unsettling posture. The sight was so jarring that Zolek lowered his rifle to get a better look in the moonlight. When he raised his scope again, the figure had vanished. Later, Zolek confessed that his time at OP Rock was taking a toll on him. He felt a crushing sense of combat fatigue, a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He even began to question his own sanity, wondering if the stress of their grim situation was causing him to see things that weren't there. Zolek was haunted by the events of that night, the whispering, the footsteps on the roof, and the eerie figure with raised fists. He tried to convince himself that it was all in his head, a product of stress-induced hallucinations. Throughout the rest of his watch, he continued to hear the unsettling sounds, but each time he checked, he found nothing. By dawn, Zolek was grappling with the unnerving possibility that he was losing his grip on reality. He approached Sergeant Green and Corporal Lena, confiding in them about the figure he'd seen, the whispers, and the footsteps. He was convinced he was unraveling mentally and requested a transfer. His departure was met with mixed reactions from the rest of us. Some felt betrayed, accusing him of feigning madness to escape the harsh realities of OP Rock. They dismissed his experiences as fabrications, a convenient excuse to leave a place none of us wanted to be in. Days after Zolek's transfer, Lena was on guard duty. Ugly Betty, our faithful dog, began barking furiously in the direction Lena was monitoring. He scanned the area with his night vision goggles, spotting what he thought was a Taliban scout on the mountainside a few hundred meters away. Switching to his thermal scope for confirmation, he found nothing. No heat signature, no sign of anyone. Yet Ugly Betty continued to bark aggressively at the seemingly empty spot. Lena returned to his night vision goggles, and shockingly, the figure appeared again, now alarmingly closer. The speed at which it had moved seemed physically impossible. As he toggled between his thermal scope and goggles, the figure disappeared and reappeared, defying logic. Then, feeling a tap on his shoulder, Lena spun around, expecting to find one of us. But there was no one. We were all asleep, far from the guard shack. This experience shook Lena. He had been skeptical of Zolek's claims, but now he faced the same inexplicable occurrences. In the days that followed, Hoyt, Smith, and Wilson all reported similar eerie experiences while on duty in the guard shack. We began to share our stories, slowly realizing that Zolek might not have been imagining things after all. The skepticism that had clouded our judgment gave way to a shared sense of unease and uncertainty. Then, on the 59th day, just as our departure was within reach, a new crisis struck. All our radios went dead simultaneously. Lena approached Gibbs, our communications specialist, his expression a mix of urgency and confusion. The silence that enveloped us was more than just the absence of radio chatter. It felt like a heavy shroud, a prelude to something we couldn't yet comprehend, as we stood on the precipice of our final day at OP Rock. Gibbs, our comms specialist, was baffled by the sudden failure of our radios. He had been diligently maintaining them throughout our stay at OP Rock, and until now, they had functioned without a hitch. We did have a satellite phone, but its reliability was questionable at best. We were effectively cut off, isolated, with the oppressive silence weighing heavily on us as we hoped to endure just one more night without incident. Wilson was on guard duty in the shack when, without warning, the night erupted with the roar of machine gun fire just outside our base. He was blindsided, unable to pinpoint the source of the attack. We scrambled to our positions, taking cover behind the Heskos. Lena rushed to the shack, gripping Wilson, demanding to know the direction of the assault. The gunfire was relentless, a cacophony of chaos. Amidst the turmoil, we heard the unmistakable whistle of an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, headed our way. Lena and Wilson braced for impact, anticipating the explosion. The RPG seemed to smash into our OP, yet the machine gun fire didn't cease. Some of the younger Marines crawled into the trench, seeking shelter from the onslaught. We needed to ensure no enemy was hiding in our trenches, but a thorough check revealed nothing. The gunfire continued unabated, a barrage that seemed to come from nowhere. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. We didn't dare to relax our guard. Experience had taught us that a lull in shooting often precedes another round of attack. For hours, we remained hunkered down, waiting for the next volley that never came. With the first light of dawn, we assessed the damage, expecting to see the scars of battle on our outpost. But there was none. No sign of the intense gunfire, no trace of the RPG hit. It was as if the entire assault had been a phantom, leaving us with no explanation for what we had experienced. When reinforcements finally arrived, we were more than ready to leave OP Rock. The mysteries and unexplained events had taken a toll on all of us. But our departure was not the end of the ordeal. Shortly after leaving OP Rock, tragedy struck. Smith, Parker, and Diggs, 3 of our 8, were killed in separate incidents in Afghanistan. Sergeant Green, our leader, was severely injured in an IED explosion. Lena, reflecting on our time at OP Rock, harbored a chilling theory. He believed that by unearthing those bones while digging the trenches, we had unleashed something sinister. The history of OP Rock was steeped in bloodshed. When the Russians invaded Afghanistan, they captured OP Rock and executed all the Mujahideen there. Then the Taliban reclaimed it, killing the Russians stationed at the outpost. And then we, the Americans, took it from the Taliban, adding to the cycle of death. Dozens, perhaps scores of lives had been lost at OP Rock. Lena was convinced that we had disturbed a curse, a malevolent force born from the violence and death that had plagued that strip of rock for decades. He feared that what we had encountered at OP Rock was just the beginning, and that the curse, whatever it was, would come back for him and for all of us who had set foot on that haunted ground.